Hi, Dr. Dave Musser from the Lancaster campus of HACC. Today we're going to go through a sheep brain dissection. Here's the sheep brain. Two hemispheres, the cerebral hemisphere and the longitudinal fissure running between them. There's a white glistening structure, part of the brain, the outer covering. It's called the dura mater, which you can see my pointer is underneath the dura mater. This is where cerebral spinal fluid circulates. You can see this on both sides. And then there's a layer adherent to the brain, and I'm just going to show you a different specimen because this doesn't show it as well, called the pia mater, which is a whitish layer that's strictly adherent to the underlying central nervous system, brain, spinal cord. This is the pia mater. So the pia mater and the dura mater. That's a superior view. From an inferior view, okay, the first thing is going from anterior to posterior. These are the olfactory bulbs, which are cranial nerve number 1 for sense of smell. These are the optic nerves. There's cranial nerve number 2, taking in the sense of light. The two optic nerves come together, a structure called the optic chiasm, where some of the light rays are going to pass from one hemisphere to the other. And then they continue back as the optic tracts to the occipital lobe. So it makes an X here. So optic nerves, optic chiasm, optic tracts. Next thing you know here, this is your master endocrine gland, the pituitary. It's attached to the hypothalamus of the brain. And then working down, this would be the midbrain, pons area, and medulla. I want to show you something on this other specimen I have here. This shows the basilar artery very nicely. The posterior brain is supplied by the vertebral arteries, which when they get up to the brain they connect to form the basilar artery, which will then connect into the internal carotid by the circle of Willis. Now, just looking at the cerebral hemispheres on both sides, they're generally areas of the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and occipital lobe. And there's convolutions with elevations called gyri, and then depressions called sulci, all throughout the hemisphere. This is the cerebral gray matter. Also seen on this view, behind the cerebral hemispheres is the cerebellum, the structure here. Now we're going to do what's called a mid-sagittal section through the brain. And this, you just take a knife and go right through the longitudinal fissure, while with your other hand applying pressure to gently pull the brain apart. And this will get us to a mid-sagittal, which is really where you can identify most of the pertinent anatomy for our class. Okay. So it comes apart nicely like that. You just want to press down, gentle pressure, and then, okay, all the way through. And that's pretty tough stuff there. Okay. Now, I'm going to switch specimens. I just cleaned that up a little bit and want to show you this section. Okay. So up here is the cerebral hemisphere, anterior, posterior cerebellum. Starting from the medulla, so the spinal cord enters the foramen magnum and becomes the medulla of the brain, the first part of the brainstem. Then the pons is an anterior prominence here, superior to the pons. This is the cerebellum, and the white matter of the cerebellum is seen here. This is called the arbor vitae. Okay. And continuing up, above the superior to the pons is the midbrain. This would be the area of the cerebral peduncle, and superior to that are the inferior and superior colliculi. In the middle of the midbrain, running through, is the cerebral aqueduct, which comes up from the fourth ventricle, the cerebral aqueduct. Now, coming up in the next part of it, we see the pituitary now in a sagittal section. It's been transected. It sort of hangs down off of the hypothalamus just below it. Another part of the hypothalamus that can be seen is this mammillary body, which has to do with eye reflexes. Okay, and then coming up, now this is the optic chiasm, which we saw. If you can, and this is, you have to think a little three-dimensionally with the brain. Looking back at this model here, remember the optic chiasm is where the optic nerves cross, so we cut right through there. So now we're seeing it as this. The thalamus is a rounded area here. This area in here is the hypothalamus, which the mammillary body is part of. Behind that, posterior, is the pineal gland, and then we're back to the colliculi. So midbrain, cerebral peduncle, mammillary body, pituitary, optic chiasm, thalamus, pineal. Now working our way into the higher portions of the brain, we have the corpus callosum, which makes up the roof of the lateral ventricle. So at this point my pointer is inside the corpus, inside the lateral ventricle, which is really the only ventricle you can see in this view. Now I just want to show you a few transverse sections. Actually, I'll switch to another. So this time I cut the brain across, I'm sorry, in a coronal frontal section. Okay, some sections of brain. And you can see nicely the white matter tracks, and the cerebral cortex is gray matter. It's gray matter, all this. Longitudinal fissure is here. And now these are the ventricles again, just seeing lateral ventricles from a transverse section. And this is a shot, this is a pineal gland, and then these would be the cerebral peduncles. Okay, thank you.